English language teaching. Under the covers.
This is the follow-on from last week, and today's focus is on ProfesorRich. Do you want to be called ProfessorRich or Rich or?
Good question, man. I think Rich is fine, yeah, but I do have my brand ProfesorRich, and I've started saying Teacher Rich sometimes now as well. But I don't know. Yeah, whatever. Let's go for Rich. Let's keep it down to earth. It sounds a bit pretentious, doesn't it? To be like, right, let's speak to
I've been known as
ProfesorRich.
NeilTEAcher for the past, half a decade, so I'm used to it. I actually think it's my last name now, Mr. Teacher. Weird.
Okay.
Okay, so Rich, tell me the story of how you came to be a teacher. Let's dive in.
Okay. Well, I guess the little preamble is that there's the whole thing about, I was working in IT and doing a bit of training there. Although, to be honest, on reflection, that's totally incidental. That really didn't play into me becoming a teacher whatsoever. It's very much like you said last week, I think very much it was the idea that teaching was the backup plan. And I think we both thought, at the time, there was going to be some sort of entrepreneurial possibilities in Spain, right? Which obviously did not really turn out to be true. I mean, there were, but I mean,
you did with IT, the training. Do you think that's helped or informed your teaching at all? Or you?
Yeah, I think just a tiny bit. I think very surface level stuff. In fact, it's even hard to put my finger on exactly how it has informed my teaching. But if you think about it, I did have, I spent a lot of time explaining things to people who really didn't understand those things. I mean, that is your job as in IT, isn't it? You're speaking to people who don't know how to use computers, and you're trying to tell them something that's actually fairly advanced or whatever. So there was some, but it's hard to put my finger on exactly how that came across in the teaching. But I think it is
that out of hand, because someone that's not got that background, that's not used to explaining stuff, they're probably, it's a good beginning.
Yeah, I think so. And also I think that teaching how to explain stuff or training teachers to be better explainers, is probably one of the more hard things to do. Like, you can teach people techniques about how to deal with it, and you can teach people the grammar and stuff, but actually, like, teaching people to, it's almost teaching people to teach, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the controversial T word of teaching, because these days with teacher training, the focus is always on elicitation and the students autonomously having fluent conversations and interacting with each other, and the emphasis has kind of gone away from actually teaching stuff. But let's be honest, at the end of the day, sometimes it is good to grab a pen and teach some stuff on the board, right? Yeah. So explanations, I think, are a pretty important part. So there is something about that. But much like you, when I arrived in Spain, I got that job at I don't think I should name that company. They were not a good company. And they paid really poorly, and they hired me with nothing, and didn't give me anything either. I had that weekend training course that I did with you, and they hired me, on the back of basically the fact that I wore a suit and walked into their, their building, and then they said, okay, you've got first certificate class tomorrow, kind of thing. And then I kind of flew by the seat of my pants from there, didn't I? Because it was actually quite traumatic, I think, that first week, because I really had no idea what I was doing at all. And there were students who'd paid, good money. Sort of, I can't remember exactly how much it was, but it's maybe something in the region of like €90 a month per student. And there was these are classes with like 12 students in them. So you add that up, that's a fair amount of money. And I was kind of going in and just, this is someone who knew very much pretty much nothing, right? So I remember I was doing loads of prep as well, like, hello, you know, I was writing like what I was going to do pretty much every minute of the class, trying to like figure out how to do it. Yeah, it was pretty stressful.
You being very stressed, and also doing a lot of like work at home, a lot of prepping at home, a lot of like, this didn't work. What do I do? What can I do better? It seemed like you didn't shy away from doing the work. You really stuck in, trying to kind of conquer it. It seemed
a bit, but I absolutely had this belief that you know, I could sort of crack teaching on my own, and I've seen people since then come into it with that attitude. And, you know, on reflection, I don't think is the best attitude to have. I think we can quite comfortably fast forward 2 years. You know, I had 2 years of scraping along at that company. Yeah, improving, getting better in many ways, you know, kind of learning the hard way, really.
Yeah.
And then, well, then insert, I had a very negative experience with International House Valencia, but we don't really need to go into that. They took me on without a CELTA, which they shouldn't do anyway. And then they did some pretty nasty stuff to a couple of members of the staff there and stuff. So, well, you don't really need to go into that. But, you know, I was feeling quite down about teaching, but like you, I knew that I enjoyed it. I liked the possibilities of it. And, you know, I knew there was something to discover there. And I wanted to go further. And I finally made the decision to do the CELTA. And one of the biggest things that I got out of doing the CELTA, I mean, I got plenty out of doing the CELTA, but one of the biggest kind of realizations I had was that it was what we should have done at the start, you know, and that was really frustrating for me to realize that basically I'd spent 3 years banging my head against the wall, learning the hard way. And then I did this qualification that would have taught me it all the stuff that I had to learn like that. And I wouldn't have ended up working for such a terrible place in the first place, you know. So that was a big thing for me. And it kind of, the CELTA got me into phonemics as well. It's the first time I started looking at phonemics and messing around with that stuff, which later became, you know, something that I really got into, you know, pronunciation.
What drew you to phonemics?
Well, actually, we were told we should just learn it before the course. It was in the pre-course task. It was like, learn the phonemic chart. So I did. And then when we got to it, I realized that pretty much no one else on the course had learned it. It was just me. So the tutor sort of pushed me to use it and to do stuff with it. And so I did, and I quite liked it. But it wasn't until later on I really started to discover, you know, the power of pronunciation, teaching, and phonemics, I guess. Anyway, from there, I got involved in the Cambridge English oral exams. And that was really interesting to see the perspective from the other side of the chair. You really get an understanding of what you're sending your students into then, and certain aspects of examiners that you wouldn't otherwise necessarily think of, you know, the human aspect, you know, because you hear the conversations between the examiners as students are out the room, saying things that they shouldn't really say, like, oh, that guy was a bitch, wasn't he, or whatever, which you're not supposed to do, but, you know, everyone does, because, you know, they're humans at the end of the day. What are you going to do, not say anything? You know?
I know you're supposed to be only grading the language, but it always bleeds in there, right? What would you say was like the big difference from when you were just teaching general ESL to kind of moving into the exam prep? You know, like in terms of your teaching, or any takeaways that you had, anything that surprised you?
I don't think there was really anything mind-blowing at that stage, to be honest with you, Neil. I thought that exam-based teaching was my forte. And I thought that, yes, I liked the advanced classes, or whatever. That was my perspective at the time. And I liked exams because you tended to get, the students who were doing exams tended to be a bit more, you know, academic or go-getters or whatever, you know, and they tend to be quite advanced anyway. I mean, there's no point in taking a formal examination to say that your English is just above shit, is there? You want to be able to say that it's like upper intermediate or whatever, or better. And so I think actually it's a bit of a crutch for newer teachers that they kind of attach to it, and I did. And to go into another aspect of this, something that's worth talking about is while I was having my terrible experience at IH Valencia, one of the classes they sent me to was, I don't think we talked about this last week, did we? One of the classes that they sent me to was a state school. Did we talk about this?
Oh,
I think maybe I might have mentioned it briefly.
Kids?
Yeah, the little kids that I just completely lost control of, and it was like, we were talking about, it was like kindergarten cop, and I was like, I was kind of shouting at them and stuff, which is obviously just not going to get you anything. No. And they were throwing their pencil cases out the window. They would, there was one kid just walking around the room, just going, that was what he was doing. He was just walking around the room doing that. And I was like, stop doing that, sit down. It was like I didn't exist, everything.
A whole other topic I think we could talk about with this idea that, so that's a public school, but it's outsourced to this company, and they're sending someone in, with not that much experience. And we kind of have this idea of education as it's supposed to be of the highest level. But, oftentimes it's just a business, you're just,
right.
Even public school teachers, I've seen, like with other, like local teachers in different countries, you're just kind of thrown in there with no background. It's like you're almost babysitting. And that's, for foreign language teachers like ourselves, but also just like the native teachers, it's just, we need to plug a hole. And, it's not the idea of school that you have where everyone's like, oh, education, it's the most important thing for children, when often in actuality, when they pull back the curtain, it's just like, it's the same as any other kind of
money in, money
company.
out. It's actually worse than that, to be honest with you. Because I had been teaching for maybe 2.5 years or so, but I'd never taught kids. So it was my first ever kids class. And they didn't give us any special training on it. The CELTA is not made for, well, I hadn't done the CELTA by then anyway, so that didn't matter. And I was with the head trainer. He was going to the school with us. We were all going together, and I said to him, I don't really know what I'm doing here. Like, what should I do? He gave me this like sheet that was like, I don't know, it was like label the footballer's kit or something. Like that was it, like a couple of handouts. And I was like, what do you do if they like don't behave? And he's like, oh, get the troublemaker to sit next to you and then say, don't do that again, kind of thing. Literally, that's what he told me. Really? This is the head trainer, International House Valencia. Well done, International House, good job. So, that's what he told me. And it's just like, and obviously that doesn't work, or it doesn't work if you don't know what you're doing with it. Anyway, it's like, it was nonsense. Anyway, I was totally traumatized by that. I was really stressed out by it. And I came home, sent an email to them and said, I'm not doing that again. Find someone else for that. And they got the idea, and they did. But that put me off doing kids. And this is an important part of my story, right? Because it put me off doing kids and also made me tepid about teenagers, because I hadn't really taught teenagers. I'd only taught young adults. So then I was stuck in this box world of wanting advanced adults. Like that was my thing, and I was like, advanced adults, But a few things happened. First of all, at the academy where I started working, while I was doing this oral English examining, I got given a teenage class there that I was a bit like, okay, yeah, I'll try it kind of thing. Because they were like intermediate plus or whatever. So I thought, it's not going to be too difficult. It actually turned out they were quite young teens, I think. They were like 14-ish, maybe an average of about 14. But like I got on really well with them. I just had a really positive experience with them. No behavior issues at all. They were like super well behaved. Had a really good time with it. And sort of thought, oh, that's interesting. And then the key thing that happened after that was that I taught a summer school. And that was through Mr. Wayne in Valencia, right? He got me in there. And this was with Discovery Summer. And that was possibly the best if not certainly one of the best experiences that I've had as a teacher. Was going there, because that's teens, that's 14 to 17-year-olds, and they have juniors on campus as well, but they're under a different team, the junior team, right?
Why was it the best experience? Was it in terms of like upgrading your teaching, or just, you know, how much you enjoyed it? Can you explain more?
Yeah, there's a couple of aspects of it. I think I went in quite nervous because I thought, well, I've always had this thing, advanced adults or whatever, and then suddenly I'm thrown in the pot, you know, and you did get behavioral issues there, right? But I think there's a couple of aspects of it. I think one, the team there was so good and the training was so good. Like every week they had an inset session. In the teacher's room, there was always people around to like give you a hand with stuff, you know, other teachers were happy to talk about ideas. It was a really good, positive kind of energetic atmosphere, you know, the sun's shining, you know, the kids are having a good time. Everyone just felt kind of happy and good about it, you know. Yeah, particularly the director of studies, obviously Wayne's the ADOS there, and then the course director are just really phenomenal, very approachable people. And as soon as that comes across, you gain a lot of confidence, because you think any problem I'm having here, like if I go in and I start getting like someone who just won't do, you know, what I want them to do, there's so many different resources I can go to here. Go to the other teachers, go to the ADOS, go to the DOS, go to the course director even. He was happy to have a chat, you know. And they were all happy to kind of chew things over in a really kind of casual but, you know, experienced way. And that just, I think my teaching just went on light years from that, because I got into it so much that I was just working all the time. Like even when I was supposed to be off duty, I was still like doing stuff because I was really buzzing off the experience. You know, maybe it was like adrenaline or something. I guess maybe it's one of those things where it can go either way, because you go into a summer school and you think, oh, I'm a bit nervous about this, haven't done this before. And I'm sure many teachers have absolutely awful experiences at summer schools, right? Yeah. But I, you know, thanks to Wayne, like getting me in with Discovery Summer, I think I just happened to land in a really, really good one, and had such a good experience. And after that summer, like a lot of things changed for me. Like suddenly I wanted to teach teens, right? And I was interested in giving kids another go, right? I was kind of like, oh, I could give kids another go, you know, because teens are not, you know, teens are kind of, you know, a bit closer to kids than adults or whatever. Yeah. And, you know, and some of the kids that I was teaching were 12 of the summer school, right? They were, you know, they were the big 12-year-olds because they were in the senior program, not the junior program, but, you know, they were 12, and that's kids, isn't it, pretty much, you know? And, you know, you had to do kind of kiddie things with them. You couldn't sort of sit with them and say, well, should we talk about philosophy, like you would with the advanced CAE classes or whatever, right? So that got me into that. And it also kind of triggered in my head the idea that maybe I was going to do the diploma at some stage.
So it kind of like reignited a love, or just gave you a love for kind of teaching? Because you don't, a lot of teachers, it's just, I'm not going to say a lot of teachers, but for some people, teaching is a job. The best teachers, it's not. It kind of, there's a passion in there, and yeah. It's something that you get a lot from many different aspects. If it's just the enjoyment of interacting with your students, or the challenge of how do I explain this, or how do I teach this, or even kind of getting into the materials, because there's so many different types. Yeah. There's so many different assets you can hold on to.
Well, I think that I did love the job, and I was bringing that whole personal development thing into it, wasn't it? So I had this big thing about, you know, gusto, motivation, you know, and I'd like go into the classroom and be like, come on, let's do this kind of thing, you know, and people got something out of that. I think you can see it on the YouTube channel, can't you? You know, it's like, that's how I try, and that's what I do there. And I, you know, obviously I wouldn't do that for 60 minutes of a class, but it does come out a bit. And what I hadn't realized before is that when you do that with teens, like they sort of do it back, you know, it's kind of like, you get it back. And then before you know it, everyone's bouncing off the walls. And then later I realized that also can happen with kids as well. So yeah, I really got into that. I really got into teaching teens, and And I furthered, I did Discovery Summer for 4 years after that. And every year I had a great year. And, things kind of trotted along. And eventually I took the plunge through the Trinity diploma. Now, the reason why I'd held off on that is because I was really pushing to get a job at British Council Valencia. That was what I had my sights on, right? And it's so competitive there. And it's really cliquey as well. I'm just going to say it, and loads of people who work there told me, yeah, it is cliquey, you're right, So I'm pretty sure that, anyone will be willing to admit that. It's cliquey and it's very competitive, and I really struggled. But they pay for your qualifications, and the Trinity diploma is not cheap. Right? It's like $4,000 just for the tuition fees, right? So you still have to pay other things as well, because you've got your accommodation when you do the teaching practice, right? So I was really reluctant to pay for that. I wanted to get into the BC, and then they hate you calling it the BC, right? All the marketing material always says, do not refer to the British Council as BC. But anyway, forget everyone does anyway. Okay, or whatever. But anyway, if you get in there, they pay for your diploma, and that's what I wanted. And it wasn't happening year after year. And eventually I was just like, look, either I'm going to do this or I'm not going to be teaching anymore, basically, because it was the step that I needed to do. And that was incredible.
Once you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound. So if you've got that diploma, that's kind of like, well, it's almost like you've invested a lot of money in. You're going to be a teacher, and you're going to be a teacher for a long while after. So I kind of guess it's a big decision, right?
That's a very good point, yeah. And I think that's probably worth noting for anyone who watches this and is having thoughts about doing the diploma. You're always going to have those doubts, aren't you? I even had it about the CELTA, I didn't want to take the CELTA. I was like, oh, if I was going to take the CELTA, I should have took it at the start. And I just, every year was regretting it.
The CELTA wasn't cheap either.
No, it's not. So they are big decisions to make. And it was a tough one for me, the whole taking the diploma. Because as you say, you're tying yourself to that career then. And at the time, if you remember, I was doing a lot of games journalism, and I was doing a lot of interviews with video game developers. And that was something that I was really interested in. I was kind of like, maybe I can make something of this kind of thing. So yeah, it was sort of deciding, do I want to commit more to teaching? And in the end I did. And it was the right decision, actually. And I kind of knew instantly, because right after, signing on and making the payment, past the point of no return and starting the course, I loved the course and I really got into it, and I got into it all the way through. And I know not everyone on the course had that experience. Some people really hated the fact that part of it was online and this kind of stuff, They thought that, the forums would not, no, the forums were active, but they didn't post in the forums. That's the thing. I got into it. I was posting all the time and really trying to make the most of it. And I set up a Facebook group for the other teachers on there, and, we had all kinds of stuff going on there, and it reminded me of that Discovery Summer thing, that kind of melting pot. That's what it felt like, all these different teachers, different ideas.
What you put in, right? It's like that in most aspects. I think that's the general life lesson that many people don't know. They're so passive.
Yeah, I think you do get good and bad qualifications as well, though. But that particular one is really, the Trinity diploma. I don't even know about the Delta really. I know it's similar, but I know that there are differences as well. But I can't speak for it. I haven't done the Delta, but the Trinity diploma I can speak for, and it's really good. And the phonemics is fantastic. The teaching practice is incredibly stressful. Everyone was so stressed during the teaching practice, my God. And I was vaping at the time as well. I remember you'd go to the smoking area just before people are about to go into class, and it'd be like, it's like literally people just having fits, yeah. It's, so, and there was like a daily crying, and not to be sexist about it, but it was basically the girls, right? It was like a circle of certain girls as well who just every day would just go and have a cry in the garden because they were so stressed.
It helps. It's a release. What smoking is for release. Other guys will just punch pillows or something like that, or shout at a rave. He's trying to get all that energy out, isn't it? Right.
I was drinking a bottle and a half of wine every day. that was what I was doing, literally. While I was writing my lesson plans and stuff, I was doing that as well. I'd have a bottle of wine, and I'd be like, and by the time I got to the end of it, I would have done like a bottle and a half. But somehow those turned out to be good lessons. It's funny as well, from the dip, because those lesson plans that I wrote while I was doing the teaching practice, I'll still go back to them. It's the damn good lessons, So it's like you learn that as well. You get those big, those really well thought out lessons and get them in your toolbox. And so one of the key things that happened while I was on the diploma, we already spoke about, was that I got into TBL. And I'm not sure it's really worth talking about that again, because we went through it last week, didn't we, what task-based learning is and everything. But it certainly opened the door of task-based learning for me. And I guess the diploma in general, what it does is it basically shines a light on the CELTA and says, look, that's just one way of doing it. And we kind of taught you how to do it that way in the CELTA, because it's sort of, it's the one-size-fits-all approach. Now you've got to learn that actually you can do it pretty much anyway, as long as you can, you have some sort of rationale for doing it that way, right?
So it's like you've learned the rules, now you get to break the rules.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of the Bruce Lee thing, doesn't it? Before you know martial arts, a punch is a punch. Then you learn that a punch is you put your shoulder here and twist your hip and twist your fist and you hit with this part. And then when you're a master, you realize that a punch is a punch.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of that. And it is, and you get exposed to all these different methodologies like TBL, teach, test, teach, really focusing more on phonemics, having hefty chunks of phonemics as well, a good 20 minutes of phonemics in a class and how you can use phonemics and the benefits of it and all these different things about drilling as well. My drilling before that was basically tomato juice, and then this table and this table, and that was it. That was my drilling. And then, on the dip, you kind of learn there's all kinds of stuff you can do. You can get people doing it in different voices, closing their eyes, drilling with other people. I really like that thing of where the teacher says it and then they close their eyes and replay it in their head and all sorts of different things. And then how you can work with pronunciation, where you're literally showing the students your mouth,
Yeah.
Or if you're doing the sound and you're you can put your finger here and your tongue touch your finger, really
Putting
just
the
getting
piece of paper over and doing can you do the purr and the burr and all that sort
That's
of stuff.
right, yeah, the voiced and unvoiced, yeah. So all that stuff, and it really got me into the phonemics. And I just, you kind of realize that there's so much to explore with teaching as well, And remember when we were talking about what we were going to call this podcast, and I brought up dogme with Scott Thornbury. So that's one of the things that kind of, we touched on in the diploma, and that's another way of doing it. The idea of dogme is kind of, a teacher should be able to teach kind of just going into the class and just kind of off you go, and not necessarily having, a less defined lesson plan and materials. And dogme is all about being able to expand on emergent language and having a toolbox of things that you can do with the students without having to have prepared 20,000 worksheets. And
I think that is kind of
stuff.
the end goal. And that's what you see in movies and TV shows when they have that teacher, or even the kind of the wise old man, Master Roshi kind of thing. They just, whatever they're doing suddenly becomes a lesson. And it's they've not planned it, but you've not seen all the work that's gone in previously to make Roshi a master.
Yeah,
but,
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think definitely you need to be more experienced teachers to be able to do dogme effectively. Actually, I've never really dived into it that much, but it'd be tricky for a newer teacher to do. But I do. I like prepared materials as well, and I think there's a lot you can do with that. And I've just realised as I've got to this point, I've missed a step, a really important step,
okay,
which I said last week we were going to talk about, which came out of Discovery Summer. One of the teachers at Discovery Summer kind of propagated a website called lessonstream.org, and it became quite popular with a lot of the teachers there. Lessonstream.org was the collection of online lesson plans by a chap called Jamie Keddy, who, yeah, I mentioned last week, and he's pretty, he's sort of, you know, he's up there with the kind of TEFL greats, you know, and also kind of modern TEFL greats. Like I said, you know, he's kind of the younger one, right? And whereas all the kind of older guys are, you know, in their kind of 60s or whatever, you know, he's in his kind of late 30s or whatever he is. Anyway, his thing is this idea of dialogic storytelling, which I'd never done anything like before, So dialogic storytelling, I mean, this is only one of the things that he does in his lesson plans, but it's the basic kind of core premise of it. So dialogic storytelling is basically you have an interesting story. Actually, a lot of stories can be interesting. Even stories that are not that interesting can be interesting when you present them in the right way. But you have a story, and basically you make the story interactive. So at the start of the story, you might, for example, introduce one of the characters, and you have that old thing where you have answers to questions about the character, and they have to guess what the questions are, right?
Kind of
so
like
this kind of gets.
Libs?
Is that what it's called? Yeah, it's just, I don't know what you call it, but it's just when you have like I just have a picture of the character, and then I have like, you know, 48, you know, Brazil, you know,
Yeah.
and they have to guess what the questions are. So, you know, you can start off with something like that, get them invested a little bit. And then you might say, you know, this is a line directly from him. It says it's one of his favorite things to say in class, which is, I'm going to tell you a story, but first I want to ask you a question, right? And then he'll ask a question like, what type of person is your postman? Right? Yeah, right. And, you know, people might talk about it or whatever, or I think the actual question he asked, the one that I'm thinking of, was something like, do you know your postman's name or something like that? Are you on friendly terms with your postman? Right, so that kind of gets, you know, people start thinking then, what's this story going to be about? Because that's a bit weird. And then, you know, you'll start telling the story, and you'll kind of have breaks in the story where there'll be some sort of activity. And often these activities will be about, you know, making guesses as to what's going to happen next. Like one of them could be introducing a couple of vocabulary terms, you know, letterbox and, you know, whatever, postcard and, you know, drugs, and, you know, this kind of stuff. And, you know, check that the students know what all these things are, and then say, right, how do you think they're going to come into the story now? Then the students are making up their own stories, obviously, and this is a great communicative activity because they're coming back with all of their ideas and they're having to tell the story as well. And then you move on with the next stage. And his stories have, they have kind of quite a lot of sort of, what you call them, kind of like ta-da kind of moments, right? You know, or like, you know,
like twist. Is it a Shyamalan?
Yeah, like
situation?
a twist, or yeah, definitely kind of gripping elements. Yeah, like the one about his postman.
He's actually
is,
a ghost.
His postman sees him at a cafe outside and walks past him, and as he walks past him, he says, "Coca." Right, and you know, in Spanish, because Jamie Keddy was living in Brazil at the time, Barcelona, and you know, he says, you know, what does that mean in Spanish? Well, it means cocaine, right? And he said, well, what's happening here? Is my postman trying to sell me drugs, or you know, what's going on with it, right? And that obviously gets everyone spicy and excited because now we're onto some controversial topic, and you know, it actually turns out that what it was is that the previous resident in the apartment where Jamie Keddy lived was called like Miss Senora Coca or something, right?
Oh, okay.
So he, you know, he thought that was his name, and that's the kind of misunderstanding of it. But anyway, there's lots of those bits in there, and then afterwards you kind of backtrack and do some language analysis or some sort of creative sort of task based on a similar theme or topic to the story. And I really got into this style of teaching because it was unlike anything that I'd done before. You know, I'd always been working with books before, you know, course books and stuff. and then suddenly I didn't need course books anymore. And I liked using the projector though, to kind of move things on, and the board. But I kind of felt that for this sort of material, you didn't really need that many handouts. Sometimes it was good to have handouts, but it wasn't like, okay, now turn to page 7 of the course book, which often with teenagers, it's like they switch off as soon as you do that, don't they? They're just like, oh God.
Yeah, because it's just like you're moving them along, right? Check all the boxes. There you do, that this is school, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
When you're doing stuff like this, you're taking them out. It's like, okay, so what am I doing?
Yeah.
Am I learning? Are we just having a story? What?
So I learned a few things from Jamie Keddy. One of them is the kind of the narrative element that a lesson can have. That a lesson can kind of take people on this journey with mysteries. And it became my favorite type of lesson because people got hooked into it. They wanted to know what happens next, right? And I liked that, and it was exciting. And then people started to look forward to the lessons. That was one of the things that I learned. And then one of the other things I learned was that you can do all kinds of stuff in an English class, and it can still be good. Like in one of his classes, he teaches some vocabulary about winter. It's like the leaves on the trees are bare, the sky's gray, there's a man, there's a preacher, right? And he teaches this vocabulary because preacher, who knows that? Oh, it's like a priest, but in old America. Oh, right, okay. Right, and then he gets the kids to draw a picture of these two scenes that he's described, right? And he does it as like a dictogloss as well, because he dictates the instructions twice. So he says, right, I want you to draw 2 pictures. In the first picture, there's blah, blah, blah. In the second picture, there's blah, blah, blah. And then he says it again, right? And then he says, off you go kind of thing. So it's also a comprehension activity because they're like listening to these instructions of what they have to draw in the picture, which is quite, there's a fair few things in there. There's the leaves on the trees are brown, the sky's gray, there's a man going for a walk. There's a thought bubble coming from his head. That's one of the vocabulary items, thought bubble, right? And then it takes them a good, because I've done this lesson loads of times, it takes them a good sort of 20 minutes to draw this, right? And you kind of think, that's a language class. And, you've got these kids just kind of sitting there drawing for 20 minutes, is that, how, imagine trying to justify that on a CELTA, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's quite magical, because they're well into it, and you've taught them all this vocab, and they're drawing away, and they're drawing their own little thing. And some of them are really artistic, and some of them aren't, and they all do different things. But it's got that personalized thing. And then obviously from there you move on. You start getting them to think about what this guy's thinking in these 2 pictures, and that's how the story comes in. You start telling them things about the story. You say, no, he wants to leave, but he can't. Why do you think he can't leave? And why do you think he goes to a preacher? And what do you think the preacher says? And all this kind of stuff. And this one actually turns out is based on a song. It's what's it called? California Dreaming by the Mamas and the Papas. You probably know it, right? That one. And you kind of play that song at one point, and that's kind of the big bang moment of that class, actually, because you've kind of told them this story, and then suddenly you play the song and they're like, oh, it's a song and I know all the words to it because we've just been talking about them for the past 50 minutes, right? So they can actually listen to the song, know what the story is, and understand all these terms like the leaves on the trees are brown, the sky's gray, there's a man going for a walk, right? And it's got all kinds of great pronunciation elements as well. It's because it's got I think it's a second conditional in there where it's, if I didn't tell her I could leave today, I'd be safe and warm if I was in LA. So then you go off and look at that and look at the grammar of the second conditional and how did they say it? Did they say, if I could, or did he say if I could go, or whatever, and you look at the sentence stress of it, and yeah, that's great.
A great lesson. That's a great lesson because it's multi-sensory, and I see what you mean by, how would that be like a CELTA type class? But one of the things with kids as well is, they want to produce. So, something like that, you know, maybe there's a mixed class. They can all make that painting, that drawing. They can all do something like that, and then they can kind of see how other people have done it and think about, you know, how, you know, different aspects that they've missed on it. So it's kind of like when, you know, when you read books and you picture, you know, the characters in your head, and it really helps you remember. I kind of see it in like that, except they're kind of, instead of producing that in their head, they're producing it on paper. So it solidifies it, makes it real. And then to tie that all into a song as well, which, you know, will then start to grab more of the auditory students, and they can repeat that in their head. I just see it, so many different aspects of it, engaging all parts of their learning faculties, you know, memory, and maybe I remember the picture, but some will remember the song, and whenever they hear that song, they'll see the picture. It's just a web.
Yeah, that's it.
It's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I totally agree, Neil. Yeah, and I think that thing about the picture, it's such a strong element of personalization, because whenever you ask someone to draw a picture, you know, as long as they don't completely bomb out, like, and they just do like a one stick figure and then leave it kind of thing, you know, as long as they, even if they're just doing stick figures, but, you know, they try and do a few of them at least, and they get something on there. It's a good, it's like personalization, but not the normal kind of personalization we do in an English class, you know? Not the normal kind where it just be, you know, I don't know, like a dictionary-based definition with some element of student personalization. Instead, it's like this artistic creativity thing coming in. And that song's a catchy song as well. You know, and like I say, I've done this lesson loads of times. And a couple of times, like, the kids get hooked on that song. And, you know, you hear them going around listening to it on their headphones and stuff. And that's amazing, you know.
Well, then it means something to them. And that's kind of like what kind of music is. I mean, this kind of like whole idea of what language is. We're trying to communicate something, and or you're taking things from the communication and personalizing, making it your own. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And you start that from the beginning with a new teacher.
No, I don't think. Well, I mean, you could, but I mean, there's something to be said about setting up PPP first, isn't there, and then moving on from there. But yeah, it's like you say, there's so many different layers, and you know, he had loads of lessons that were great anyway. So I kind of dived into that website and really tried to create more of my own lessons like that. You know, and it's not easy actually. They're quite difficult lessons to make. They take a lot of effort and creativity. You know, and you have to be kind of switched on when you're planning them. But I think they can be very effective and really interesting for the students, because it's just something a bit different. You know, and I've got one or two in the bag that I've made over the years that are similar to that. And they are, you know, probably my best lessons. Yeah. I think the absolute best lesson I have is, this is kind of a weird thing to say, isn't it? Is that something you can even ask a teacher, what their best lesson is? Well, I think the best lesson I have is and,
you know, aspects of the game that they're really good at. You know, I don't see why you wouldn't.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird thing to admit, though, isn't it? To think that you've got one lesson that's better than all the others. But for me, it's I've got a lesson on utopian, dystopian futures, and I could do this at intermediate and upwards. And I could probably adapt it for less than that as well, but I don't tend to. And it looks at two of my favorite books. It looks at The Player of Games by Ian M. Banks and George Orwell, 1984. And like, I designed all the kind of activities on it, and there's a couple of readings on there which are adapted by me, and you know, all these different activities. It was loads of work, but it's definitely one of my favorite lessons to do, and it has a lot of Jamie Keddy like elements in it, a lot of kind of narrative. The final task involves the students planning their own future world, you know, and there's this template where they decide, is it going to be dystopian or utopian? And then they have to make notes about the government, make notes about society, make notes, and obviously they've had all this input along the way. And I found, yeah, the kids really get into it. And it sort of coaches them into the next lesson, which is that they give a presentation based on the future world template that they've created, and have some presentation skills going on. But yeah, they take a lot of work when you're doing all that stuff, and you're really having to think about these sorts of activities and how you're going to put it all together, because things really need to link together well. It's not just like, one of the things I really like about TBL lessons is you just have to come up with a good, authentic task that people are going to enjoy, and then you just work backwards, right? But you can't really do that with these more like dialogic lessons. There's something a bit more to the process.
Well, you seem to tap into that idea of like thought experiments, or these controversial or contrarian ideas, you know, where people mull this over and they kind of want to touch it, but you know, it's maybe too spicy. But you know, if you can do that in a language class, it's kind of like, oh yeah, I can think about, you know, utopian or dystopian, and it's just, you know, language practice. But you know, it kind of allows you to engage into, you know, the bigger questions of, you know, well, why we're here, and all that sort of jazz.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't see, you know, them as being that spicy a topic, but in certain countries, yeah, you're right. I mean, I was doing it in Vietnam, you know, and you know, one of the big things about 1984 is it's kind of a warning about the possibilities of authoritarian communism, isn't it? You know, and Vietnam's not authoritarian, you know, but they are communist, you know, so there is this kind of idea, you know, because in 1984 you're like, well, there's only one government. Oh wait, but there is in Vietnam, right? So that's not really surprising for those kids, you know. So yeah, but yeah, I wouldn't say that's too spicy. I don't think many things.
Maybe spicy is not the right way, but you know, those area of not even taboo, but these areas that I find that I move into with my students that are more advanced, where we kind of like start to get into the nitty-gritty and the details and of how everything's kind of like not so black and white. There's a little bit of gray, there's a little bit of good to topics, a little bit of bad.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
You know, kind of the way that we're talking about education, and you know, we all have this idea of what it is and what it is to be a teacher, and then when you kind of get into the details, you know, there's business aspects to it, there's, you know, personal motivations of the teacher, you know, they might not be just learning, they might be, you know, using it as a means to meet people and all this sort of jazz. But if you can kind of allow people to explore a topic without any constraints, it leads to some interesting discussions. That's one of my favorite aspects of teaching, especially advanced students.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. And I think, you know, if we're honest about it, the students that sort of a great deal of the students who stick to it and do well and enjoy the classes tend to be the ones who are also engaging in that other way, you know, that kind of social way or fun way, you know, they're having fun in the class. They're not just going there to learn a new thing about English every class, you know, there's another element of it for them that's making it more interesting, and as a result of that, they benefit more. They're more into it, they're more engaged, they're coming back every week. You know, it becomes you know, like a hobby more than a duty.
You're learning something. If you're learning English by through learning something else, it just adds that layer in the same way that who you mentioned adds layers with his lesson. It's just a different way.
Yeah.
So you did all this, and that you did all your diploma, and then from the diploma we moved to Vietnam.
Yeah, I mean, there was a little stint in Japan, wasn't there?
Oh yeah. Sorry, I forgot about that. Do you want to talk a bit about that? How that?
I think it's worth mentioning that. I think one of the main things that I got out of that was their whole shtick was they had lesson plans. They were happy for you to go off-piste, but they had lesson plans already done, and they didn't have any materials. So there was no books, no handouts. There's just a lesson plan and a board. And they were 1 hour classes, and you did them 7 times the day. So you did the same class 7 times, 1 hour classes with just a board. So this was kind of new because, you know, obviously I'd never done anything like that before, even after, you know, however many years of teaching I'd had by then, 7, 8 years of teaching, whatever it was. I'd never just gone into a classroom and taught with just a board for 60 minutes, you know, and they you know, the students aren't expecting to come into this class and write either. They're expecting to speak for 60 minutes, right? So that was interesting. And, you know, I my board work obviously got better, right? Because I used to use the board just like my little sketch pad. You know, I'll just write whatever on it in any possible way. And suddenly I found that I had to like divide it up into all these different sections, you know, and basically the lesson plan got transferred onto the board. Like you could actually look at the board when you first come in and you'd be able to see everything that's going to happen in the lesson pretty much, or certainly all of the, you know, the structures of certain activities. So I learned that, this kind of, you know, more kind of low materials, working with, you know, and using your board more effectively and all this kind of stuff. And another thing that I really got a lot out of on their methodology was they did this thing called conversation patterns. And I'd always thought in the past, because, you know, you see these in like English file and stuff, and it's like copy the intonation and listen to the conversation and blah, blah, blah. And then you kind of do the conversation again with another student, but like change 2 words in it. And I just kind of thought, what's the point in that? But actually it can become a lot more expansive, and this is the way they used it. So you had these like conversation patterns, which is literally like A says this, then B says that. But you put other elements into it, like you put substitution in there. So it's like, you know, I think that, like opinion, and then at the bottom you have a list of opinions, you know, and one of them might be, you know, Donald Trump is really Batman, you know, or like apples are better than oranges, right? And then the second person, you have the you know, you have the, you might just have response in brackets. And again, there's some target language for that you've already drilled the pronunciation of. So that'll be stuff like, no way, blah, 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 right? And then the response to that might be, no, I really think that because reason. And then they have to, that's when it becomes freer practice, because they have to actually come up with a reason. No, I think he really is Batman because have you ever seen Donald Trump and Batman in the same room together? Because I haven't, you know, or whatever, right? The point is, it's this kind of stage between controlled practice and freer practice that enforces use of the target language, right? So it's not really freer practice because you're not just letting them go, but then it's not so controlled either because it is a conversation. And also the fact that that it's like a spoken control practice rather than a written control, because most control practices tend to be written, don't they? You know, fill in the boxes or whatever. Whereas this one's spoken, you know, and I found it went really well when you get into it, when you learn how to use conversation patterns, and the students like it too, especially certain cultures of students who can struggle with how to express themselves. You know, they can, if you just say to them like, right, have a conversation about, you know, which cheese you like or whatever, you know, they'll just be like, oh, do you like cheese? Oh, I like cheese. Okay. You know, it's conversation over. So
they don't want to kind of, I guess, more Asian, in my experience, more Asian students, you know, there's that aspect of faith. They don't want to say something that puts the other person out or, you know, tread on too many toes. Plus also the idea of having a more education system that's academic, in that you're kind of like, you're trying to almost, you know, some of the stuff can be quite rote. So you're just kind of like trying to repeat it because that's what you're accustomed to. So being able to build off what you're accustomed to and then kind of jump into the freer stuff. It's kind
what
of
I found
net.
is,
it feels safe.
sorry. No.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, it kind of, that, for me, what I found with that kind of control practice with speaking is that it's in their comfort zone for certain students. And
That's right.
it's kind of like, you just kind of, sometimes people like cats, they just kind of need to get a little bit accustomed to the new environment. To be like, okay, I've said some words here, I've got a sentence out here, okay, we're good, my grooves are greased, and let me go.
Yeah. I think along those lines, I basically found that these conversation patterns, these kind of conversation patterns with a bit of improvisation in there, they became a really good stopgap towards role play. So you'd do the conversation pattern where they'd be doing something like that, and then you'd go into the role play after that. And they'd have the conversation. Because they've done the conversation pattern with like 7 other students, because you do it like a rotation or like a mingle or something like that, right? So they've done it like a million times. So they've got all these phrases in their head as well. And then you fire them off with the role play. And, it was perfect that it kind of, because they were loose enough to be able to do the role play,
If I were to do like Callan again and just do my own spin on it, it's kind of like, that's what I would see it be building towards. You're just practicing, get into the groove, get that pattern going on, and then see what you can kind of throw in there, or put them in a situation where it's like, okay, so this is the situation, how are you going to use this sort of language? It's interesting.
Yeah, completely. It definitely. And it reminded me of something, actually. Again, I'm going to jump back now, because I was about to say, well, it's kind of a bit like drama teaching that you're doing, the way that you're doing that, because you're greasing the wheels with this sort of stuff, and then you're putting them in the role of actors, and that can be really good for certain cultures that aren't comfortable expressing themselves openly without like an excuse.
Even
right?
just personalities for different people. Some.
Oh yeah.
I've had students that are really timid, and then I'm like, no, now you're Hulk Hogan. I need you to speak and talk. What would Hulk Hogan do right now? And,
they're like, oh, okay,
and then they get into it. Or I'm just using Hulk Hogan as an example because not many people.
Yeah, I remember this guy, this Japanese kid in the university, right? And he's he was quite quiet like a lot of the time, quite sort of well spoken. Then we did this role play where like you're having trouble with your I think we said it was housemates, or was it neighbors? No, it was housemates. So it was people you live with, housemates. I'd explain the concept of a house share because they don't really do that in Japan. And then we did this role play as housemates, and he was brilliant. He came up with all this stuff, right? He was, he was accusing, like, there was this like super like well-spoken like girl sat next to him, right? Who was being like super polite and blah, 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 blah. And, the idea was to come up with a problem with your housemates, right? And he was like, you stole my money. and she's like, she just looks at him and she's like, no, I don't think I stole your money. He's like, yes, you stole my money. I saw you steal my money. it was absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And she started laughing, and they all got into it. And it's just like, a great bit of fun. And as we were saying, kind of like drama teaching. Yeah. Spinning back on that was another thing I got from Discovery. Another of the specific things. Kind of, because I got into this mode of running with the ball, and I'd never done anything like this before, but, it was mentioned that someone needed to teach the kind of drama class for the final week. And I just went, okay, I'll do it, because I was just sort of saying I'll do it to everything that they said at that point, because everything was interesting. And everyone was like, what, really? What, you're going to do the drama teaching? It was really, there was reactions like that, like, are you sure? Like, you tend to do the sciencey, like whatever stuff, right? Like I was doing like the magazine and the newsletter and the futuristic stuff. So a bit of a different thing. But I had an amazing experience doing that. I learned all this stuff about how to teach drama games and, you know, getting the kids to like role play and, you know, mingle around and pretend to be different roles, and you're just giving them commands, you know, you're just saying words like wizard, and then they have to go like, you shall not pass. And then you're saying stuff like, okay, walk around, find space, faster, faster. And they're like walking faster. And I'd never done anything like that before, right? So doing that was really cool, because now I can do stuff, if there's enough room in a classroom, you can do some of that stuff in the classroom, right? And that's good, you know, because it's all that physical engagement and another string to your bow. I think well worth any English teacher giving some drama teaching a go.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that I got hired on with the Callan teaching, was because of my background with kind of like doing media production and being accustomed to, you know, doing on-camera kind of stuff. They were just like, yeah, we need that's the kind of energy that you need to be doing the direct method. But I think doing lessons in and around drama, it's a key aspect, because you're also, as a teacher, you're also kind of putting on a persona in many ways. I don't know about you, but you know, NeilTEAcher is very different in a class with children to adults to even different cultures.
Yeah, very much so.
Got many different hats, like Mario.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think you have to. You can't be the same person. Well, I mean, you could. Some people are actually the same person in the kids' class, the adult class. There's amazing people who can do that. But no, I'm definitely different. Yeah. Right, so spinning on from there, I guess, that was, obviously it was very, very interesting for me doing that stuff in Japan. There was a few other things that came out of that as well. There's a speaking strategy, don't know if you've come across this, called ask, answer, add. It's like a circle. They just go around in circles with it. And it's very good for Asian students, you know, because normally what happens with Asian students is you give them a question like, what's your favorite day of the week? And what we'll say is, what's your favorite day of the week? Friday. What's yours? Tuesday. You know, and that's it. Yeah. So then you give them this strategy, which is ask, answer, add, which basically means, you know, they ask the question, well, what's your favorite day of the week? Then he answers it, Tuesday. Then he has to add something like, because, I play video games on Tuesday. And then it goes back to ask, right? So then he has to ask a question, which he might ask the same question back, but it's going to come around again. So when they get to that stage, then they're going to have to say something else, right? What's your least favorite day of the week? Because they have to think of a question. So you give them that rule. That's the rule. You have to, when you get to that stage, you have to think of a question. You see how many times you can go around and keep the conversation going, and it works for them. So that was something that I'd never really come across before, and that was kind of cool doing that. So yeah, and then obviously it was all Japanese culture was brilliant, and learned, you know, Japanese students are very interesting. They just do everything you tell them to do. You know, okay, I want you to do 27 pages of homework, and they do it, you know, and you're like, I was kind of joking, but all right. Yeah, no, fantastic, brilliant. So that was a great experience. And then after that was Vietnam. So Vietnam, what happened there? There's a few things that happened there. Going outside of teaching, I got involved in some sort of more training and management things, but I don't really think that's interesting stuff for this podcast. I think more interesting probably is, or more crucial to my teaching story is like I was teaching mainly kids. So I'd transitioned from teens, and I got kind of younger and younger. And then suddenly, particularly in my last, in the majority of my final year teaching there, I was teaching like tons of like 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old, you know, and really getting into that and kind of working out more about how you teach them. Because I also did, while I was at the British Council in Hanoi, I also did the Trinity Young Learners Extension, which is really good, actually. I mean, you know, it's supposed to be something that you do after the CELTA or whatever, and before the diploma.
Well, CELTA has their own one as well, right?
Yeah, well, it did. I don't know if it still does. But yeah, I think they did. But I think that the Trinity YL is definitely the big one at the moment.
Okay.
I know IH had one as well, but I think it's gone now. It's a bit odd, really, because the market is kind of moving towards them more, if anything.
Yeah.
Like it's a desirable qualification to have. But anyway, I actually found it to be more diploma level, and I think that might be more to do with the institution, though, because I'd certainly heard rumors. You can't confirm this stuff, but I'd heard rumors that one place's TILEC is not the same as another place's TILEC, right?
Yeah.
Apparently, the rules for passing people are quite flexible. But anyway, I had a really good experience with that. And it really gets you thinking more about the rationale specifically for kids, what kids want, what makes them tick, what's different about their brains, like really, you do like the psychology and the neurology and things like that. Why is it that teenagers get so emotional? Well, blah, 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 blah,
It's a huge aspect, because
sorry?
you're not dealing with fully formed people. You have to take into account that, often they're kind of like a little like cavemen. Once all right, maybe they get upset, it takes a lot longer for them to like calm down, or there's certain other aspects that come up that you kind of have to account for, which you don't with more adult students, and I don't think a lot of people consider that.
Yeah.
What would you say was your biggest takeaway from doing the TILEC? If I had to push you on it.
No, I this was something that I once had in my head, and I remember I put it to I come out with it in one of my like reviews or whatever, and it was like bang on the nose, and I'm trying to think what the hell it was now. I'm just going to remember. I'm just going to have to think a bit about the TILEC, I suppose, and what I actually got out of it. It's again, it comes down to rationales a bit. So I guess that's what makes it a bit more seltzery. Mind you, the dip's a bit like that as well when it comes to the lessons. I mean, rationale is like this thing that will just bite you in the arse again and again and again. But when you get through it, it's really beneficial for your teaching. So, it's the thing that like any sort of any tutor on the course is always going to like bang you on the head about the rationale, right? They're going to want you to really justify what you're doing. And if your rationale's not good, it's going to be like, why? I'm going to do this so the students are kind of, happy. Well, why? You need something more than that, So yeah, it's the rationale. And one of the interesting things about the TILEC is, I don't know, again, if this was just a British Council thing, whether it was their template, but they had a very interesting like template for the rationale on their lesson plans. And basically, this template, it had all the different areas of the rationale. So it'd have stuff like, I don't know, like what the hell did it have now? The language, one of them would be language, and one of them would be, I almost feel like I should load up one of these lesson templates and then take a look at it. One of them would be like behavior maybe, and some other stuff. And then across the top, there was 3 columns, and the columns were, what was it? Assumptions, expectations, and support. And it was one of those things where if you really filled in that grid with the rationale properly, it really helped you to understand where you were aiming your lesson in terms of how difficult it should be. And what I found was, if you got to a point where, like, for example, you were having to provide you're writing loads in the support box, like, I'm going to give them all these extra materials because they're not going to understand this and blah, 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 then that's obviously too challenging. And if you've got like you know, not very much going on in the assumptions box, then maybe it's too easy. And one of the really interesting things I found about this is if you kind of nail the rationale with young learners in this way, you don't have any classroom management issues. So what happens is you hit the rationale for the class at the right level, and that basically, that is the point where it's challenging but also doable and interesting for the students, and so they don't misbehave because they're just loving it, you know, and it's challenging, right? So that was a big epiphany for me.
Like you've hit all your base stats and you've got all the aspects covered, so it's not too hard, not too easy. It's not, you know, it's engaging, but it's not, you know, too much that it would take them off course. So it's finding the right balance for everything.
Yeah, that's right. And it's the epiphany that if you get the rationale right on these separate areas, then it solves your behavioral management issue, right? Because people are always, with kids, people are always like behavioral management, classroom management. What do I do? How do I control them?
In the class. And
like how do I get them to behave? How do I da. But the reality is, if you've got a shit hot lesson that's hitting them at the right level, you're not going to have any problems with behavior management, right?
It's true.
So that was amazing for me. And you know, the other thing about these classes at the British Council as well, they were grouped by age, not by ability. So I guess that's similar to your experience, right? So that was interesting, because obviously you had this massive amount of differentiation then, because you were like, oh, I've got that kid who can, you know, barely say hello sitting in the corner. Like, he's going to be climbing up the wall, isn't he? While everyone else is having a great time engaging with the materials, he's going to be going mental. So, you know, well, he needs support, right? You know, you go back to your rationale, right? Okay, support needs to be provided to that kid. How are you going to provide support? Well, I don't just want to send the TA over there and then lose my TA, do I? So, right, I have to come up with something, some scaffolding or some simpler materials or whatever, differentiated materials that's going to engage him. But yeah, that was a big, after that huge ramble, the only point I wanted to make was that rationale is deeply tied to behavior management. And I'd never really come to that conclusion. I'd never realized that before. You know, I, like most people, I think, or like a lot of teachers, thought that behavior management is all about carrot and stick and leaderboards and all the rest of it. Whereas, as a matter of fact, it's not necessarily.
No, it's kind of almost like if you're thinking in that way, you're going into the classroom being prepared for a problem. You know, if you're like, oh, what can I do to manage the class by doing stuff in class to get them in tow, when it shouldn't even be a consideration, because you know you've got something that works, that's covered all your bases. Yeah,
absolutely. That's it. If they're challenged, if they're engaged, if they have the right, you know, support on these different levels to be able to, for something to be challenging but doable, but, you know, and interesting, you know, then that's it. That's young learners, you know. It's all
funny
over.
Because when I've dealt with other teachers or other new teachers, you know, they do want classroom management help, and that's the help that where you're talking about with the carrot and the stick is the stuff that I would actually help them with, because that's what I can give them. Because going into the whole aspect of, you know, of trying to explain, you know, why you should have a good lesson, why you should have a lesson plan done in this particular way, is the whole reason that we do these sorts of TILIC courses.
Exactly.
You know, for a backpack teacher, it's just, you know, they just won't get that far in. And often you can't persuade them to get that far into it.
I totally. Well, they might get into it, but I just think
you can stoke their love for teaching, and then they'll pursue it themselves.
Yeah, I think you need to have those tools early on, anyway. Though, you know, I think it's necessary. I don't think anyone unless they've got, you know, someone who's got a particularly natural talent. Maybe they grew up with young kids or whatever. But I don't think many people could just jump into a classroom and not start using some carrot and stick. You know, I mean, you need to. And even, you know, even then you can have exceptional circumstances where, you know, you do have to use some disciplinary action.
There's a wasp.
Under
There's
any...
a wasp, teacher. Goddamn wasps always taking destroying my classes. Or it's a fly. Okay, so we've come to the end of your teaching journey from Vietnam with children.
Pretty much. Yeah, I mean, the main thing that happened after that, I was applying for all of these management roles, and, you know, doing quite well with applications and interviews and stuff. And then obviously this happened, the pandemic, right? So then I got into the online stuff and also reignited the YouTube channel. And that was fun, to be honest. I think the kind of amount of skills that I've accrued over the time, like I'm using, for example, the IWB software that I got to use at the British Council, because it's free software, right? So I downloaded that, and I've been using that to like present my classes, and the students love it, you know, because they're not used to it. They don't, if they get any kind of presentation, I assume for the teachers they get like PowerPoint, and it's not very interactive. But this stuff's just like a whiteboard, you know, so you can do all kinds of stuff with it. So I've been doing that, and yeah, I've really enjoyed the online thing actually, and I don't know if I'm going to go back and pursue the management thing now, to be perfectly honest, even when it all finally comes back round. Maybe training be interesting at some point. But yeah, no, I'm enjoying the teaching at the moment, to be honest.
Well, it sounds like it, and it sounds like there'd be a lot of waste for such experience to kind of move into management if you're not going to be doing training and stuff like that. Hopefully, stuff like this podcast is where you can kind of pass on that to not just, you know, people that are working for you, but, you know, for many people on the internet, whoever, you know, subscribes to this channel.
I think that academic management involves a lot of things which are not fun. Yeah. Lots of administration, lots of organization, lots of you know, things like that, which are not really, I don't know. They're things that people have to do. But they take a toll of you, don't they?
You know, especially start talking about money and you know, dealing with that aspect of education. And
yeah, I mean, that's the tough one, isn't it? Because this kind of goes back to the things you were saying at the start, where we can idealize education, but at the end of the day, it's, you know, money in, money out. Who's making the money? And that's, you know, that's why the industry is the way it is. That's why there's so many places that will take backpack teachers and pay them $9 an hour, you know, or whatever, which is, you know, it'd be great for us, all those teachers, to get together and say, no, you must pay us at least what you paid us in the 1980s, you know. But it's not going to happen, is it? To be honest, it's a free market at the end of the day. If you're gonna go into this job and make something of it and make it into a career rather than just your little traveling gig, then, you know, you have to be selling something beyond just, you know, flying by the seat of your pants, don't you? Yeah. And I guess that's why we get into all this further development stuff. You have to be offering something that is noticeably, you know, higher quality, or provides, you know, some sort of niche element of teaching, of which I think there's plenty of those as well.
Well, I think the way that we're moving now, just, you know, going a little bit beyond teaching as well, is, people need to start looking into meta skills, and combining two career paths, two big major skills that maybe you wouldn't have to before. You know, like maybe before you could have been a TV presenter, and then, or you could have been a scientist. Now, if you've got to create your own new categories and become the scientist TV presenter. And
that's a good point, actually, Neil, because I think one of the advantages I've always had, and particularly have right now as a teacher, is my tech ability. And I think that has always been very appealing to the students, and staff as well. People like to work with someone who knows what they're doing with a computer, kind of thing. But and I do combine those elements. I like work. I wouldn't. That's one of the reasons, I guess, why Japan was so interesting, to just be working with whiteboards and not having any technology. But I tell you what, if someone offers me an IWB, an interactive whiteboard, or a projector even, I love it. I love projectors, and I think you can do so much with it. And I can do it fast. That's the point, fast. There's no messing around for 5 minutes while the teacher gets everything together. It's just bang, 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 and it's up. And if you're listening and maybe you want to do some emergent error correction, based on the language they're using, I can just be bashing it out on the keyboard, super quick, like way quicker than I can type, than I can write. And that's not something that is going to be available to all teachers. No. If you have that tech background, great. If you don't, then you have to do something else with it, right?
I just see it as it's another teaching aid. We've got flashcards, but if you can put these, memes up on your PowerPoint or whatever interactive whiteboard that you have, that's just a multimedia version of flashcards. And the more you can use different things in a classroom that you can engage students with in a different way, I'm all for it. Getting them to, it's just kind of the same principle as getting them to draw a picture, to then listen to the song. It's just how can you hit them in all these different ways, in all these different avenues? Because maybe you don't get them in this one particular way, but you might reach them in this other particular way. So you really need to. And I think that's one of the things that really helps with being a teacher as well is, I can only really speak for myself, is that you have a lot of meta skills, but they're kind of hard to define because you do have that little bit of drama teaching, you do have a little bit of the tech resources, you do have storytelling, you do have to teach skills, on these task-based lessons where you might not, and you also have to be quite knowledgeable about other things as well. You're not just teaching English, you're teaching about, like the biography of Abraham Lincoln. So you're breaking down the English within that, and you
learn a lot, actually, don't you, being an English teacher?
It's there's so much to it, and you're kind of a jack of all trades.
I think almost it feels like the point that we're getting to with this is that. And maybe this is reflected in my story, that when you jump outside your comfort zone into a new thing, like for me, I had the summer school, the dialogic storytelling, the teen class, the teaching Japanese in Japan, and not being able to use any materials or technology, all of these things where I was outside my comfort zone and kind of limit, in a way, like synthetically limiting or changing my teaching style. But they're the things that I got the most out of, because I was in a completely fresh environment where I was, it was almost like you say, this is what I am as a teacher. My favorite thing is the projector, and I have my interactive PowerPoint and sound system, and I have the kids sitting in that U shape with 16 chairs, right? And then you want someone to come up to you and go, right, now you're going to go into a classroom where there's no projector. The tables and chairs are set as islands. So you've got islands of tables rather than the U shape, and there's no multimedia, and you're going to be teaching in there for 3 months, And to start with, you'd be like, oh God, really? What, I don't have my magic pills all of a sudden? But then you go through that and you come out of it and you're a better teacher, because you've like come through with that limitation, and then suddenly you have some new skills. I guess the moral of that is
when you get that aspect where they take everything away from you that you've previously known, rather than kind of shitting your pants, you should be like grabbing at it because that if you do this, you're leveling up. You're just adding something else in there. You've like Superman and Doomsday. You kill him, and he just evolves, and he comes back a little bit stronger. And I think that seems, from my perspective, to be a huge part of your story, and also why you are so competent and good at teaching.
I think it's critical, yeah. But I mean, what I would say is that there's obviously a balancing act with it, because you can look at what might be considered a failure in that regard, which is when International House Valencia sent me to that state school, and I basically panicked and everything went horribly wrong, because I didn't have enough competence and skill sets and training to be able to manage the challenge. So it became too much and had a very negative effect on me because of that. So it can be done wrong as well. It's not necessarily just a case of throwing yourself in the fire, but it's a balancing act of jumping outside your comfort zone. But I think it really helps you've got a good support network.
And I've had like graded training, just like graded reading or something like that. It's whatever you need for that particular point that you're at with teaching, to get to the point where you are the punch. Again. And in fact, something that I would I'd want to talk about a bit more at some point would be just the ideas of kind of communities of teachers, and teachers talking to each other about ideas, and I mean, I'm not sure how the places were where you worked, but I assume some of them were pretty positive in terms, because you're positive about teaching, so you probably had that kind of experience. But for me, I think there's something pretty magical about places where you work and you have teachers who actually want to talk about teaching. I was always a bit confused about that thing when you went down the pub after teaching classes. Teachers go down the pub after teaching classes. There's a news flash. Controversial.
Yeah, I know. Don't.
Teachers are
at the summer school, we used to call it the library, because obviously there's kids everywhere, so you can't say it. So it's like, oh, do you want to go to the library later? Yeah, okay, let's go. They must have thought we were off the planet. They probably just knew what we were talking about. But anyway, these places where you have a very positive environment and people actually want to help each other with their teaching and give people ideas and talk to each other about, and then you get all these different styles of teaching coming together. I think that is maybe one of the key things of what to look for in a good institution. Like, one of the big things that you should look for in a place to work is like that sort of environment of teachers, like just a positive teaching environment.
It's huge, and it doesn't just make a difference for you as a teacher, but it makes a huge difference for the students as well, because those are the places where they're going to get the most out of their learning. Okay, so let's move on to a different question. Same question that you posed to me, but tell me about the sort of expectations that you had of teaching before you taught, and then the reality after. Could you speak a little bit about that?
I'm not particularly sure if I had too many expectations about what teaching was going to be beforehand. At some point, I might have started to form some expectations. I think I definitely, to begin with, thought that I would be able to come in and magically come up with some new awesome ways of teaching people without actually like getting into the training and years of experience. So maybe coming a bit too cocky, actually. And I probably carried that for a couple of years as well. that kind of idea that my methods are the best that I've personally come up with, and I see it in other teachers as well. You see it on forums and stuff, don't you? You know, oh, I haven't done, you know, I've never been in an observed class. I don't need to observe other teachers because I've got my own shit hot method, right? And you know, and I definitely had a little bit of that, which I think is wrong. But you know, but you think, you know, you think you can come up with something new. But when you start diving into the age-old stuff, you know, you realize there's a lot more to it than what it might seem. And also there's lots of flexibility in these things as well. So I guess that's one aspect of it. I don't really know what else to say about this question. I mean, teaching has been a very organic sort of path that's gradually unfolded for me. Okay. And I had many questions along the way as to whether it would be a long-term path or not. Although I always enjoyed it, I always had concerns about the financial long-term viability of it, which I think a lot of people do.
It's not often very rewarding financially for a teacher. But hopefully, I think more and more ways teachers now can earn money outside of just being in the classroom, and because you know they're generally people that are highly skilled. It's just their kind of their product or their service is kind of stuck, but I think you can kind of go where with the internet and you know the world that we're at now, there's so many ways to kind of monetize your skills just beyond that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's definitely transferable skills. There's no doubt about that. But I think there's also something to be said for what you were saying before about you know, niches and combined teaching methods and combined learning as well, where you're learning English and other stuff. Even, you know, to the full extent of CLIL, combined language integrated learning, where you're actually teaching someone history, but in the medium of English, but you use all of these, you know, English language teaching, ELT techniques to make it more, because from what I can tell, English language teaching is pretty much at the pinnacle of teaching technology. Yeah. From my experience. I mean, when I look at traditional teachers, and I don't know if traditional teachers have madly changed over the years, but when I look at traditional teachers versus English language teachers, I think English language teachers' lessons are way better, right? When they're trained and everything, and they're good teachers, you know? And I've spoken to people who've done the PGCE, right? And they said it's a cakewalk compared to, you know, a Delta, basically. That was what, that was the specific
there's so many, it's, okay, you're doing the PGC, and then you just have to you have to teach a certain point, whatever it is that you're teaching in maths or what have you in that particular class. But with the English language learning, often you're having to teach something, plus you also have all the other considerations of the language around that, and you know what they know, so it's kind of a layered problem. There's so many things. You're trying to teach this, but there's so many things going on underneath that it makes it.
Plus, I just think that English language teaching is so much more demanding in terms of, you know, checking. First of all, you establish that your students have a need, then you know, teach that need or whatever, then they practice it, and then proving that at the end of the class they've gained something. You know, I mean, I don't know if PGCE does that as well, but from my experience of school classes, standard school classes, they definitely don't go through that process, you know. So yeah, I think I think ELT teachers are really good teachers.
I would love to get a teacher on here that has done the PGCE and has been teaching English as like English language, and then, you know, maybe have done some ELT after, or, you know, at some point just kind of get their ideas and kind of their perspective. Yeah. That'd be very interesting, I think.
Yeah, no, it would be. It would be.
Let me ask you something else then. Describe how you put a lesson together and how you teach it.
Well, I think there's a couple of different ways that I put a lesson together, and there's probably, if I'm being totally honest with myself, there's some more challenging ways and some less challenging ways, and the less challenging ways are not necessarily as good, whatever that means, a lesson as the more challenging ways. But maybe let's think about my favorite way to put a lesson together, which I think is more work than my less favorite ways. But yeah, maybe my favorite way of putting a lesson together is like a task-based learning style lesson with a really cool task, right? Like, you know, a task that would be like something like design a spaceship, you know, or design a spaceship, or plan a post-apocalyptic video game, right? These are lessons that I've done, right? So really like tasks like that, which I personally think are really cool, you know, because I just be like, oh, post-apocalyptic video game, right? You can talk about all kinds, zombies and nuclear bombs and mutants. You get to talk about mutations, right? What mutations? They have 3 eyes and 7 arms. And, okay, so a task like that, and then basically planning a TBL style lesson. So that's one of my favorite ways to plan lessons, because I think thinking of really cool tasks is fun. And then I think you get to sort of record yourself doing the task, right? And then have a listen to the language and think, oh, what's a good language point for this lesson? It's like the language point comes like after the task, right? Which is just kind of the way I think it should be in a way, you know?
Yeah.
Because it's like you're coming up with a task that's a fun task, a communicative task, you know, and I could do that. We could do this together now, couldn't we? We could just be like,
it makes
you know,
sense,
right, me and you
really.
gonna like have a chat about our plan for a post-apocalyptic video game, you know, and probably have quite an interesting and fun conversation about it, and it's creative as well, right? And then we can have a look at that language and go like, right, what are we going to teach the kids from this, right? You know, and I think it's a really nice, authentic way of coming up with a language point.
It's kind of organic.
Yeah, it's very organic. It's very authentic.
Teaching language that they would need, rather than kind of trying to, because a lot of the time, especially when you're teaching lower level, it's almost like you're trying to put the shapes into the box, trying to fit them, and that's kind of what your lesson is. Well, how can I use this language? And if you're starting with a task-based learning, you're starting with the task. It's whatever. Well, what language, you know, came from this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. That's totally what it is.
So with your favorite lesson, you start with the task and you kind of work back from there.
That's completely it, yeah. And normally the way this will take form, if I'm working at a school, is that I'll take whatever the theme is, and because there'll sort of normally be like, you know, this is the theme of the unit or whatever, and I'll stick in my TBL lesson somewhere. And, you know, just because it's part of the same theme, some of the same language will come up, you know, some of the same. You know, I mean, you can imagine that when you've done a couple of these, then you realize that certain tasks lend themselves to certain, you know, grammar points or whatever, right? So if you were teaching a unit and, you know, they'd just done the past simple, whatever doing the past simple means or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Then, you know, you have in the bag a lesson that you've done before with a task that revolves around, you know, telling stories.
So do you kind of mix these,
or whatever.
when you talk about the past unit, I'm presuming that you're using that's course books you're referring to?
Well, not necessarily course books, syllabus. I mean, okay. in reality, let's be honest.
So I'm like, how do you measure these awesome created lessons with having to do the book? Because every school that I've worked at, there's always a point where you've got to do the book.
Yeah, well, I guess this is an interesting thing to talk about, yeah. So first of all, just what I was about to say just then was let's be perfectly honest, 99% of schools, they don't have a syllabus, they just have the book.
Yeah.
Which is completely nonsense, really, isn't it? You know, I mean, you can't just buy a book and say, right, follow the syllabus in the book. That's so cheap, you know. The students could basically do that themselves. Why do they need the academy to, you know, what's the director of studies doing? But, you know, yeah, I think there should be a syllabus. But if there isn't, yeah, then it's the book, right? So when you're talking about units, you're either talking about the unit of the syllabus or of the book. Right, so what was the question?
So how do you balance these lessons that you create?
Okay. Because there's a necessity to teach some of the book, right? Because the school has the book because they know that they have teachers who need the book. The book's a crutch, right? For anyone, the book's a crutch. You know, you can always say, turn to page 7 now and look at exercise 5 or whatever. And or you can say like, oh, we're going to, even if you don't use the book, you can say, we're going to listen to the audio, boom, this is and it's ready prepared material.
I mean, you also have to take into account, you know, often these books, they have exams based on the stuff that's in the books later on. So if they want to pass the exams, they've got to make sure
that's right.
You know,
so well, that's a bit more flexible if that's the point. I mean, if it's like a case of the syllabus of the book is designed around the kind of topics and points that come up in the exam, then that gives you still quite a bit of flexibility to design your own lessons, but just fill in the gaps in the book. So you still have possibilities there. But yeah, I mean, one major point about this, I think, is it comes to the kind of market forces, economics of it, as we were saying before. The students have bought the book. The academy needs to sell the book, not necessarily because they make money out of it, but because they have teachers who need to use the book because they're fresh off the boat or whatever, right? They're new teachers. So the book is not going anywhere, and the students have paid for it. So you can't ignore it. Yeah, students expect something to be done from the book. So unfortunately, it does have to be crammed in. So thematically, you can do stuff with that, with vocabulary, but it can be difficult then to keep the task so authentic. And, you know, unfortunately, pragmatically, you have to sacrifice some authenticity, don't you, really? I mean, if you have it and it's, you know, this is the vocabulary items in the book, you know, well, okay, you can get those vocabulary items, put them here, and then say, right, when am I going to use these words in an interesting task? And then you do it that way, which is less fun, to be honest, but at least it allows you to do a bit of like TBL style classes using the material from the book. How do I even use books these days? I'm trying to think. To be honest, we had a lot of freedom at the British Council of Hanoi. We had a lot of freedom at Discovery Summer, lots of freedom at Discovery. Well, Discovery Summer didn't have our book. They used a syllabus that was designed by the Director of Studies, and they had all the books just laid out for you to like make photocopies, right? So they were very flexible in terms of, you know, teachers creatively coming up with their own materials and stuff.
That's great.
But, you know, if someone said to me, here's a book, you know, this is the book you need to use, how would I deal with that? Yeah, I think I'd use the book to set the tone, and I'd probably use a lot of the activities for homework, like a lot of the kind of, you know, those sort of grammar bits at the back and stuff. Like I think a lot of that stuff would be done at home, and we'd make the kind of the learning would be there in the class. Those grammar points would come into it, but we'd do it a little bit more fluidly and organically, right, with sort of expansion as and when it comes up, and if the student needs it as well, you know, because I think there's a good point. I mean, a lot of the classes I'm doing now are one-to-one anyway. So, well, all the classes I'm doing now are one-to-one. So, you know, if I'm doing a lesson and, you know, the grammar point was the present perfect or whatever, right? And, you know, we get to the present perfect and they're already saying it. They're like, oh, I've already learned the present perfect, literally. Right. Then obviously I'm not going to spend time on it, and I don't think anyone should be. I mean, I think that's one of the big things, one of the big problems, I think, actually, with post-CELTA teachers. I think pre-CELTA, it's the other way around. They don't know what they're teaching. But then post-CELTA, I think you start to make your lessons too cautious. So you kind of aim on the side of, well, even if they already know it, it's still, magically beneficial, which maybe it does have some benefit, but also there's no point in like getting people to do grammar exercises on stuff that they know.
And if they want to do that on their own time, they can do that on their own time. But the classroom, there's stuff that you can do in the classroom that they can't do outside.
So basically, I think it's a balancing act, is what I would say about that. I don't think there's an easy answer. I think we all have to struggle with it. And I think there's a definite balancing act between how much you use the book and how much you craft your material to the book, and then how much you kind of creatively go off-piste. And I'll be perfectly honest, I am more inclined to go off-piste, even when it's a little bit risky, because obviously the risk is, if you go too off-piste, right, you just go wandering off into teacher rich land and doing whatever you want, then, you get one parent, right, who's like, right, so what have they learned? Or, oh, they haven't done anything in these pages, all these pages of the book are empty or whatever, right? And that's all it takes, isn't it, to like create big problems, right? Because the benefit of structure and a book and all the rest of it is you can say, well, they've learned the present perfect and they've learned the past simple and they've learned the past simple versus past continuous.
And then when you come to say, well, let me prove, what they've learned, they might. It's a little bit more difficult then, because it's a process.
Yeah, that's right. It is more difficult, but you can do it, but then it becomes a lot more effort as well, because then, well, you have to sort of keep ongoing records of your students and their work. You have to be collecting it in, right? And you have to have it ready so that when you do get that teacher that says, what have they done? Then you go, right, boom, okay. Well, we learned how to write a post-apocalyptic novel, or plan one anyway, Look, your kid who could barely say, how are you at the start of the...
record the classes, and that could be the proof to the parents that this is what they've been learning. This is your child using the language in this natural environment.
Yeah, there's a lot of issues with recording classes, though, isn't there? Particularly with kids in them. So I'm not sure if that's ever going to be a thing. I know some places where I've worked have had a thing where the teachers, their parents come in and watch one of the classes, but teachers hate that, and I can understand why. It never happened to me yet.
Become a different person.
Yeah, I bet they do. Yeah. So I'm not too sure about that. I tell you, one of the things that Discovery Summer did so well with that is they had this blog, and first of all, they actually get it that when the kids go to the course, their parents sign like it's okay for us to take photos of your kids and stuff. And then they have this blog, and they're always taking photos and putting it up on the blog, right? And the teachers are encouraged to as well. It's like when you're doing stuff with the kids, take photos, put it on the blog. This is XYZ class, we were doing this today. And that was so popular, and the parents loved it because they could see all this shit that was going on, So yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe that is the way kind of to do it. Photos and videos. It's just that you need the permission slip.
I would take videos of my classes during the summer camps, and we would just share them, like in the Chinese equivalents of, like Facebook groups. And I'd just do like little montages, you know, quick editing stuff together, put a bit of music on it. Loved it, you know, and they get to see all their kids using, you know, the language and stuff. Even if it's just in a closed environment, you know, I can't see many schools, you know, I think they could do something like that. But,
well,
you know.
I think they could do something like that, but you can just imagine, like, if you're a teacher and you sort of take that to the director of the school, you know, and they're like, no,
It's an extra
you know,
cost, there's legality,
yeah.
and it's going to be a headache.
I think the big thing would be the legality, and I think they'd be very wary about even asking for that.
Yeah.
I think the way that Discovery Summer do it, where it's just part of the sign-up enrollment process that you do that, basically, and you don't have to do it. You can explicitly say, I do not want my child to have, and, you know, you get like 1 or 2 of them every year, you know, and it says like, oh, by the way, this person, do not video them, or, you know, fine. But yeah, I think.
Well, with the pandemic
I think
as well, we're going to have a lot of this legality and stuff popping up, because all these kids on Zoom and other different video platforms, you know, maybe the school's not recording them, but, you know, there's that one parent at home that records, records all the lessons.
Yeah, that's true.
No one's really considering that yet, and it's.
No, you're absolutely right.
There's
That's
going to be so much stuff out there, and, you know, there's already those kind of ones of people, you know, bad actors. I hate that term. Bad actors going into Zoom meetings of classes and doing, you know, disturbing stuff.
Oh, stupid things. Yeah, I haven't really read into that, but yeah, I can imagine.
But, you know,
that kind of
there's
going
to be
on.
that sort of stuff. So it's happening. It's happening, and it's just, we just kind of have to figure out what's the best way to.
I think on the other side of that coin, you know, I mean, I am a big believer that, you know, I think, you know, particularly need to protect. I think like under 12s in particular need to be protected from being sort of spread all over the internet, because there's too much, especially these days. It's so easy for. I think I read something recently that said it was estimated that by the time a child is 18 these days, there are 80,000 different instances of them on the internet. So that's including like posts, messages, like, you know, photos, whatever. And I mean, that's crazy.
Well,
but
parents don't even consider it. Parents don't consider that, you know, they're posting pictures of their child on the internet, and that's without the child's permission. I mean, we've not had that debate as a society yet. One of the other things as well, that I read a book by Jonathan Haidt, who's a psychology professor.
Clinical psychologist.
Stanford. He wrote a book called Anti-Fragile, and, you know, the kids of 12, you know, going on the internet, on social media, and how it's just, especially for girls, skyrocketing depression, suicide rates, because they're not accustomed to.
They're so much more tuned into like social pressures and stuff like that.
Yeah, and his idea with the Anti-Fragile was that we shouldn't be sheltering them so much, but more educating them on the best use.
It's a good thing. It's a good idea.
And I thought, yeah, it's a good point. And it's the same, he uses the analogy of peanuts, you know, for the past, how many, like a decade or whatever. It's just like, don't give children peanuts. But now more and more research coming along that if you give give children more variety of food, peanuts earlier in their life, just little amounts, that they build up a tolerance. And, you know, by not doing that, it's actually exacerbating a possible future intolerance to certain food groups. It was a very interesting book. Highly recommend it. But, you know, is that the
I've heard a lot about
Jonathan.
I've never read him, but yeah, I've heard a lot.
Yeah. Okay, let's do one last question, and then we'll tie this up with some shameless plugging. But the last question, and I think it's just kind of, I want your kind of initial straight thoughts, is we talk about this all the time, there's many debates, but just in your head, if you're imagining it, what is an effective teacher?
I don't think there's necessarily a simple answer to that, unfortunately, because I think it requires multiple elements. So I guess what we could talk about is what are the most critical elements of an effective teacher. And I think that for me, one of the most critical elements of an effective teacher is a teacher who enjoys what they're doing. I mean, I guess with many jobs, enjoyment of your job is useful, if not very important. But I think with the way a teacher is, I think it would be quite difficult to be just going through the motions, but hating your job and actually being, a really effective teacher. Now, there's an interesting side point to that, which I think we'll have to get to after we finish this question. But anyway, moving on. So basically, that you're motivated and you enjoy it. Then I think one of the things that can make you the most effective teacher possible is really diving into the kind of empathy for your students. I missed this when I was talking before about my story. This was another thing that I had, and it mainly happened for me at Discovery Summer with the teens. And I really started to feel like I just really cared about them, And I'd cared about my students before, I wanted them to do well. I liked them and stuff. But it's different actually when you kind of get that real tug of, oh, this kid, And I remember this particular incident actually in the first year where I worked there. There was this German girl, and she was super young. She was like, I don't know, 13 or 12 or something. And she'd done this little article. I was doing like an IT thing with them, and I was getting them all to write stuff. I think I was doing the magazine, she'd really tried hard in this article. She had closed it down and not saved it in a really dumb way. I even watched her do it while she was doing it. I was like looking over, I was like, what the fuck is she doing? It was like doing, right. And I was like, can you just check that that's like okay, whatever? And she loads it up and it loads up and there's fucking nothing there. And she just looks at me and she's just like, oh, teacher, my work's all disappeared. Like, oh God, I almost cried, honestly. I really did. I just felt so bad for her. And, I think I was probably more upset than she was, to be honest. Yeah. She was upset, but, but yeah, just the way she said it and the fact that I developed that kind of relationship with the students, I just suddenly felt like, and then I started to feel that more. And I think that kind of deep empathy that you have for students where you really think like, I really want them to get something out of this. I really want them to, if it's an exam or something, I want them to succeed. I've got some students at the moment, for example, who are a bit like that. Like I know there's so much pressure on them and they've got these exams coming up, and they're good students, and I really feel like I want them to do well. And I think when you have that for your students, I think that really contributes to effective teaching. Although I don't know how you get that. I wouldn't be able to give a guide as to how to get that. And I know, for example, that, a lot of people sometimes think that I'm not particularly the most empathetic person in the world. I think it's true. I can be a bit self-centered. So it's kind of weird for me as well. I don't know how to say that. I don't know how to say, how can you teach a teacher to go into a classroom and then start feeling this sort of, I don't know how to put it, like guardianship or, because you are in that teaching mentor role, right?
When you were talking and I'm listening to you, it reminded me of when I was studying counseling, and one of the Carl Rogers, this great humanitarian, one of his principles is of counseling, before you even really get into the nitty gritty, he says, for every person that you deal with, you have to give them unconditional love and respect. And that was it. He spends a lot of time on it, and it's basically him saying that you kind of have to see this other person as a person, leave any baggage, any preconceptions that you have of this person behind, and just be like, what do you want? You have to try to feel the best for them, regardless of, and I know it's a little bit more difficult with counseling to teaching, because you're going to have people that, you know, they might have anger issues that you don't agree with, but you're trying to put everything aside. And I kind of feel that bleeds into teaching in the way that you're talking about, is having compassion, having love and compassion definitely for your students, and kind of putting yourselves in their shoes, but also being able to open yourself up and to this person that's very, you know, different stage in their life, different personality, because we're talking adult students here as well. But if you can just be open with them, because it's you know, teaching, you can be quite vulnerable, and that's the scary part. So, you know, being able to be open and being able to see this person as a person as you are, dealing with them in that present, seems absolutely key.
Yeah, but I mean, it can, when you get to that, it can also be incredibly beneficial for you as a teacher. I mean, it's incredibly, you know, it's an incredibly high sense of well-being that you get from sort of having that sort of relationship with your students, where, you know, because they sort of know it as well, don't they? If you really care about your students, they know it. You know, they know it. It's, you don't have to even show it in any way, but they know it. They can feel that you want them to get something out of this and to do well, right? And it's the best kind of teacher-student relationship, I think.
Definitely, that you actually care about the student, and you care for their progress, and that you're doing a good job, and that you know, that they're getting something from the classes. It's a fantastic feeling. How you get that, I don't know. I think there's an aspect of kind of like Maslow's hierarchy, where you have to have a certain foundation taken care of, both personally and professionally.
Yeah, I think so.
Get into
I mean,
that.
you're going to have your mind on other things at first, aren't you? When you're a new teacher,
Yeah.
You know, you're going to be too busy like worrying about like whether you're actually able to do a class or get through the class or whatever. But yeah, perhaps there is that element of it. But yeah,
we can work on that, Rich's hierarchy of teaching.
Teaching brilliance, yeah.
Moving towards nirvana, teaching nirvana.
So I think they're the critical things, and then I think probably just very briefly going back to things that we've talked about before, I think that stepping outside of the box is also one of the other key elements, I think, of being a good teacher. I think the teachers that allow themselves to get stuck in one way or another, it's never a good thing. And if we're talking about excellent teaching, then it's always going to involve finding a new way to step out the box. Every now and then, you don't have to do it every week. You know, there's no shame in falling back on a good lesson plan. We all do it. But yeah, occasionally it's nice to try something new. That's one of the great things about observing other teachers, actually, because you see so much doing that, and that really helps to encourage you to expand the way that you teach, you know, rather than sticking to one thing. So yeah, that would be it.
Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share?
I mean, before I was going to mention that whole thing about there is a bit of a caveat about being a good teacher, which is in a lot of cases, it's most likely that being a good student is way more important than the teacher. So this is something that's discussed quite a bit by, you know, the academics and whatnot, that basically if someone comes in and they're basically the idea is if you have a good student and a bad teacher versus a bad student and a good teacher, who improves the most? And the general consensus is that it's the good student with the bad teacher. Now, actually, I don't think I've particularly been able to verify that with my own experience. I think it's certainly possible though, isn't it? I mean, if you think about how many times have you taught a class that you've picked up from someone else and you know, or you highly suspect that they're not particularly a good teacher, right? But there are good students in that class who do know the stuff that was in the book, right? So they had potentially a bad teacher, someone you think might not be a particularly great teacher, but they were still kind of doing quite well. And it's kind of like, if that is the case, then, you know, and then you have to say, well, can you do it the other way around? Yeah, I guess so, but maybe it takes a lot more effort on the teacher's part to really be able to, because you're almost having to transform who someone is. If you get someone who's really stuck in a rut and you want to try and bring them up to, you know, kind of good student level.
And it's quite a reductionist question. And
maybe you're right.
Situation.
Yeah.
You know,
I wasn't even sure if I should mention it, and now that I have, I'm not sure that I should have. I'm not sure if it's something that I read actually in a book quite a long time ago. I think it might have even been Jeremy Harmer's, you know, the Bible of English language teaching. God, what's it called? The Practice of English Language Teaching by Jeremy Harmer. I think it might actually be a quote in his book by someone else, because his whole book is basically a book of quotes, isn't it, from academics and whatnot. But you know, the more I think about it, the less I actually like that analogy. And maybe it's not particularly useful for us anyway. You know what I mean? Like, what's the point?
Well, you can write
we have
it
to
off.
focus on what we can do.
That's one of the issues as well, is if you just go in and you're having issues with a particular student, I kind of think it comes back to what you were talking about with being an effective teacher, and you're having issues with a student, and then in your head you're like, this is a bad student, and then you stop caring. But if you kind of like, if you connect with that student, if you can be open with them, if you can give them that unconditional love, we talk a bit in a fairy way, but you know, maybe that will, as you say, transform them. Or you can see, well, you know, why is it that they're a bad student? You know, it's just the case that you're stripping it back, because all right, you know, maybe they're just not had very good educational experiences at all anywhere. So if you're going to teach them, then you have to teach those points first. You know, you don't start teaching about the second conditional before you've even touched, you know, the conjugations of the verb be and have and all that sort of stuff. You just have to kind of dig a bit deeper, I guess. I feel like it's starting to delve into philosophy.
It always
now,
will.
but
I mean, that's where it always ends up.
Yeah.
When you talk about things too much. No, but that's it. I think that was the beautiful point that came out of all of that was it is that thing about, you know, if you can develop that connection of, kind of compassion for your students, or it's almost like you kind of start to see them like your kids, even if they're not kids.
Yeah.
You know, because I've had this feeling with adults now. It was since that time though. I didn't used to have it before that incident at Discovery Summer, but you know, now I get it with adults as well. And it's really like you feel like, they're your kids. Like you want them, you know, you want them to like you want them to get what they want, basically. You want them to get what they want. You care about that.
You're the Jedi to the Padawan. You know, that whole dynamic, you kind of get it. I see what you're going with.
Yeah. All right, fantastic. I guess we're wrapping up then.
Yes. What are you going to plug?
Yeah, okay. So you can, this is really a channel for language learners rather than English teachers, but nevertheless, youtube.com/ProfesorRich, spelt the Spanish way. So that's ProfesorRich. oh my God, can I even spell this myself? Profesor. There's no double letters in there. Profesor, it means teacher. I'm not a professor. ProfesorRich, and you can go on there and see all kinds of ridiculous nonsense. It's basically turning into a meme channel where I'm kind of taking bits of what PewDiePie does and like throwing them into into teaching videos somehow. But yeah, it's just me having a bit of fun.
Videos, observe, see how you do stuff. You know, there's always stuff to learn and to garner.
Yeah, I think particularly if you contrast my channel with the kind of big teaching channels on YouTube, you know, you will see a bit of a difference there. I think if anything, I would like to encourage teachers that they can sort of be a little bit of a Han Solo, you know. Yeah. You don't have to go in suited and booted and, you know, hello, I'm a teacher. You don't need to, right? You can be a bit of a renegade, you know, even if the system does try to knock you into that shape. And I think, you know, I personally think, well, yeah, I mean, I personally think that my students get a lot out of that. The fact that, you know, I am a bit casual about things, and, you know, I do kind of let myself flood into my teaching quite a bit, you know, and I'm happy for things to get to a casual level, taking it back to I think it's the Adrian Underhill quote of have a person-to-person relationship, not a teacher-student relationship, which is only, you know, possible to a certain extent. But I think, you know, if you are a bit of a, you know, rough and ready rogue like myself, then you, you know, you let that flood through. Don't try and change yourself too much. So that's what you can get out of www.youtube.com/ProfesorRich.
Buy his merch, Rough and Ready Rich.
God, yeah, I've got to have to get some. I'll have some merch for next one.